there's a lot of unsolicited advice that you get as an entrepreneur. Um, and I would say there's a lot of times where people who are not invested in our company at all have had really strong opinions on what we're doing. And I don't think we've ever been like, okay, this person said this, so we have to change everything. But sometimes, at least for me, if I hear that kind of thing, then I might start doubting either myself or the idea a little bit more. Like if they say, you guys have no experience in footwear, how are you guys going to do this? You're going to get crushed by Nike. Then maybe I think maybe like that night I'm like, man, how are we going to do it? We don't have the footwear experience. But then, day passes, a couple days pass, and then I return to kind of that same belief because it is.
Welcome back to part two of our worldie unboxed episode with Spring Hickman, founder of Punkies Playhouse. In part one, we explored how Spring revives brands like Fluppy Dogs and Hugga Bunch, builds communities before launches, and taps into nostalgia for success. Now, Aaron and I will break down key insights from our chat with Spring, discussing how her approach to community building and brand strategy connects with our own journey at Worldie. Remember to stay connected with us at worldiebrand.com and on YouTube for more highlights. All right, let's dive into part two.
So the first question I had is, can we incorporate kids more into the process? So obviously we're designing for kids. Um, Kids will be part of the testing, all that kind of stuff. But in terms of maybe the design or marketing, a few people have talked about maybe like kids influencers on the internet, things like that. Are there ways where we can incorporate kids even more into our brand and put them front and center versus all the people behind the scenes are going to be adults?
Yeah, and I think the reason why it's been adult heavy at this point is because it's all behind the scenes work this juncture. Like right now, we're trying to develop the product. We're trying to create the content or create like how we are going to be presenting the content. I think eventually as we become more consumer facing, kids are going to play a much bigger role. Kate, she's constantly like hitting me up like, oh, you should add like a 5 question like wrap up where you like have like a question for like Andy or other 5-year-olds. Just like have like a bunch of different like questions that you ask them in rapid formation. So like maybe doing something like that or getting kids as a part of like the blog, because I know we've mentioned having a blog. Um, we've mentioned like user generated content and like having kids like actually wearing the shoe. I think as we develop the product more, as we build out our framework for delivering content a little bit better, then kids are naturally going to be involved. And like obviously some of the first kids will probably be my own because they're just accessible at this point. So they're right here. So yeah, I think we can definitely incorporate kids more. And the reason why we haven't is because we've been doing a lot of the behind the scenes type work.
Yeah, I think one of the things also that makes it a bit difficult is just from a legal perspective, also parents not necessarily wanting their kids to be on the internet, right? So I think we've thought a lot about, how do we feature certain kids on our website or on our social media platforms, things like that. And I think a lot of parents just in general don't want to share a lot of information about their kids on the internet or have their pictures out there. So it's a bit of a balance in terms of like, highlighting our customers that are kids or potential customers that are kids and respecting their privacy and, their parents' wishes, things like that. So I think I'm sure there are creative ways to do it. And one of the things that I've thought a little bit about is what if you have kind of like avatars for these different kids, and that's a way to maybe build an avatar for a kid, and that's a way to kind of gather some information about them, and then you can highlight that avatar on social media or on the website, and a kid can point at that and say, that's my avatar. But it's not really, parents are going to be fine with, just an avatar out there because it's not the kid's likeness. So I think there are creative ways to do it. We just have to find those ways. But I think it is important to highlight kids, make them feel like they're part of the process, and that this product and the company is really listening to them and built for them.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just thinking about some of the hurdles, I remember like that newsletter that we sent out, kind of like soliciting, like, okay, we want to have your kids as part of like this whole process. And it's a bit hard to do it, especially when you think about like trying to grab content outside of like our families, our immediate families. And so like going into like our friends or like acquaintance and trying to get that type of like content is a bit more difficult because of that whole like not wanting to put your kids out there. And I think, being a parent, I definitely understand that, especially in this day and age with the technology that's kind of out there and like that's developing with like AI and deep fakes and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. And then one of the things that Spring was talking about was a lot of people are giving unsolicited advice, and you don't want to take advice from the wrong people. To people who are not entrepreneurs, they're not in your industry, they're not invested in your company at all, they're not customers or potential customers. Do you think we've fallen into that trap at all in terms of maybe taking advice from someone like that too seriously, like putting too much weight into advice from someone who's not really invested in our company or our success?
I won't say that we've taken that advice. We've definitely heard and like been given that advice. So I think, and I'm not going to be like specific about it, but like you and I both know like certain situations where we've talked to people who've been outside of this kind of realm that we've like already diagrammed here in terms of being an entrepreneur, a potential customer, or an investor, or whatever it might be. They don't fall within any of that, but they definitely had like an opinion on like what we should be doing or our potential like success at what we're doing currently. And we've always been able to, even if we do like receive that advice initially, and there are some kind of like, emotional, like whenever you're told something critically, or you're told something to do something a certain way, there's always going to be a little bit of an emotional like response to it. And I think initially we've had those type of experiences, and we've always had to kind of go back to like our core a bit and like figure out like, okay, this is our why, and this is why we're doing this, or this is why we're doing it this way, or whatever it might be. And I think we've done a very good job up to this point of kind of like siphoning off people who aren't necessarily like invested in this particular like field, and being able to kind of weigh their advice, good or bad, um, and kind of weigh it against like our own like whys and core values, and act accordingly. So I don't think we've ever taken advice from the wrong people to heart, but we've definitely received advice from the wrong people.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's a lot of unsolicited advice that you get as an entrepreneur. Um, and I would say there's a lot of times where people who are not invested in our company at all have had really strong opinions on what we're doing. And I don't think we've ever been like, okay, this person said this, so we have to change everything. But sometimes, at least for me, if I hear that kind of thing, then I might start doubting either myself or the idea a little bit more. Like if they say, you guys have no experience in footwear, how are you guys going to do this? You're going to get crushed by Nike. Then maybe I think, maybe like that night, I'm like, man, how are we going to do it? We don't have the footwear experience. But then, day passes, a couple days pass, and then I return to kind of that same belief because it is an enduring belief. And we've talked about a lot of different, a lot of these different things in our kind of like strategy for overcoming some of these hurdles. But I think sometimes at least for me, at least in the past, the unsolicited advice could kind of get to me a little bit and maybe create some doubt. But I think the longer we've been on this process and the more progress that we've made, it's kind of like, you can give that unsolicited advice. You can say that you don't think we're going to be successful, but I feel pretty good about what we're doing. And at the end of the day, we'll see if we're successful or not. But I feel good about where we're headed.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. And I think back to certain questions that, get asked when you were kind of like mentioning a little bit of like how are you guys, the differentiation type questions. And I was listening to another podcast over the weekend, and it's a podcast with like VCs. So there's just a bunch of like VCs who kind of talk to each other, and they talk about the state of like the market or whatever. And one of the VCs was mentioning that like one of the laziest questions that a VC can ask is what's to stop a competitor from doing what you're doing. So like, for instance, we've gotten that a lot. Like, what's to stop Nike from doing what you're doing? It's like it's one of the lazier questions of VC. That's not really a productive question to ask in a setting. And so that's not one of the questions that they like kind of bring up. So yeah, I think about those type of like the advice usually kind of like the I won't say bad advice, but like the unsolicited advice that we kind of get sometimes stems around like competition and like what's preventing incumbents from doing what we propose to do. So um, definitely didn't take that stuff to heart.
Yeah, for sure. And then one of the things, another kind of topic that Spring was touching on a lot was this idea of core childhood memories. So, how can we tap into the nostalgia that parents feel around when they were a kid, when they were first getting into sports, when they were playing with their friends? How can we get parents to tap into those memories and then say, basically, I want my kid to have these same memories in order to have them, like, let me buy them this specific shoe.
I mean, I think it starts with kind of how Spring posed the question to us during the podcast. Like, what's a memory that, like, for instance, like the whole Christmas like gift scenario that she kind of came up with. Like, what's a Christmas gift that you were excited about or that you remembered? And you kind of like you discussed it. I think it was like marbles or whatnot, like a marble setup, which is funny because I just did that for the girls not too long ago, and the oldest loved it. The youngest one destroyed it, but that's another story. But anyway, like I think it goes back to having an assessment of our own like memories, our own like what was something that like got us excited, or what kind of like things do we remember, and being able to somehow use that to either inspire us or to like have that like represented in our product so that people can kind of see it and they can have certain or the same feelings. And I think about a bunch of like anecdotal situations for me. Like there's this thing like when I was playing soccer growing up called the sweet spot. So it was it was just a band that you put around your soccer cleat, and it would like a lot of people would have the band hold down the tongue of the tongue of the shoe, or you can just like have it like over the laces. And what it did is like it just created another like flat surface on the shoe. Like I didn't go through all this in my mind when I was a kid as to like how the sweet spot worked, but like looking back on it, this is what it was trying to accomplish. It's just like flat surface areas so that you can get a more consistent touch on the ball. And like then you can also, since it's over the somewhat center of the foot, that's usually like the striking spot when you're like going to shoot a goal. And so I think about the sweet spot, and then I think about like what we're trying to do, like with it's not the same, but it's kind of like a play on that. Is by having the overlays, TPU overlays, and having them like identified like zones that you can use on the shoe for striking the ball or whatever. And that's kind of like a play on that like nostalgic feeling of using the sweet spot and having that that rubber band in essence that you put over your cleat to like create like this smooth surface area for you to like better strike the ball. So I think like incorporating those kind of things, looking back at our own like experiences, and maybe like using like the social media, the just Discord that we have to get feedback from other parents, other millennials to like, oh yeah, to jog our memory or to like share certain experiences so that we can kind of incorporate that into like our design, and not only the design, maybe in even like our approach and how we decide to market and brand like our product. So uh anecdotal, but like that's like an example of how we can kind of like tap into that, is by tapping into our own experiences, because we're at that age. At least I'm definitely at that age.
Yeah, I remember the sweet spot. I definitely remember that. And basically what you said, it starts to touch on another question that I had, which was, are there ways for us to incorporate retro elements into the shoe to kind of get parents feeling nostalgic and kind of pulling them into the brand? And I think something you mentioned already, it basically answered that question in terms of the sweet spot, right? Reminding parents of the sweet spot by having something similar on a shoe and say, oh, that reminds me of the sweet spot. Like, let me check this shoe out. So do you think there are other ways that we can kind of incorporate retro elements into the design of the product, into the brand, into maybe ways that we advertise that will get parents to notice us and potentially want be more kind of interested in learning about or buying our brand?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of like design elements that we can potentially like play with in order to like play on that nostalgia element. And one of them could be like another idea, another thought is like, for instance, if we're talking about a different sport at this point, like Reebok had a shoe called like Pumps, Reebok Pumps back in the day. And it was just like a basketball that was on the tongue of the shoe that was connected to some airbags that were in the shoe that would make it tighter so that you would pump the little ball, the little like, I don't know, inflatable ball on the tongue of the shoe, and then the airbags would like inflate, and thus the shoe would be tighter. And so you would have people like pump their shoes before they played a game of basketball. And we've talked about different ways in which to get like a tighter fit for the shoe, since it's like we're trying to incorporate a laceless design, to potentially like playing on like a pump like type of like technology in order to like make the shoe a bit tighter and customize the fit just a bit more. Having that in there could be like a cool like play on that. But there are other like things that you can do in order to give it like not necessarily a retro feel, but kind of give it a nod to like some like past like ways in which people like marketed or branding that happened in like the days in which parents are the age of the kids who they are currently buying the shoes for. I mean, I don't have any like examples off the top of my head. I'm trying to think of like old commercials like Gatorade, or we've talked about like doing some kind of uh, what do you call those things when you're kind of making fun of
Oh,
these old
like
commercials?
a parody or satire?
Parody. Couldn't think of
Yeah.
parody. Yeah, like kind of a parody of this whole entire situation where we're like making these commercials like, you know, or footage or whatever it might be, playing on these old type of commercials that were very popular growing up. And so those are different ways in which we can kind of like play on those elements in order to like kind of draw parents in.
Yeah. So I was just thinking as you were talking, because I saw an old Gatorade commercial pretty recently, the one where they're kind of like sweating Gatorade basically. So it's
Oh,
like
yeah, yeah.
like
That's wow. I
yeah,
forgot about that.
yeah. So I saw that for the first time in a while, and it felt like so nostalgic. It took me back to when I was pretty young because I had completely forgotten about those commercials. But I don't know if you could do this legally, but you could have something like a parody where someone is sweating blue, and then it's someone is concerned because you're not supposed to sweat blue or yellow or orange or something like that. So there's ways to kind of play on some of these different things and maybe make them funnier, like you were saying. And then something I've noticed is with people who are maybe in their like low 20s or late teens, they're really obsessed with the 90s, which is kind of weird because they weren't even alive during that time period. So maybe like millennials are obsessed with like the 60s or 70s or something like that. Maybe there's just these things in society and in culture that we can tap into as well in terms of either events or time periods that our target customer is interested in or feels nostalgic about, even if they weren't alive during that period.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, because I've been trying to like think of different ways to like break into Instagram and TikTok and like even YouTube a bit more. Been watching a lot of the like the videos from that are being put out not only by like Gen Z but also by millennials. And like one of the big things that I've noticed is that millennials are coming to terms with that they're the aging group now, and they're becoming like the uncool group. And so figuring out a way to like one last hoorah for millennials as they kind of go into their golden years, which not they're not going into their golden years anytime soon, but like, you know, as we at least approach it, it's like I think about like the ways in which it's been presented in a lot of these social media, like just posts and videos and shorts, and they're bringing back older music that was like popular. And then again, this is like licensing and stuff, so I don't know whether or not we can. It would be cost prohibitive for us, but like the music, even like the video quality. So they like there's different like types of video like features that you can kind of put on your shorts to make it look like it's something that was shot in the early 2000s or even like the 90s or whatever. So like I don't know, there's different ways to kind of play on it. I've definitely been doing a bit of research on it, potentially being able to kind of utilize that in some kind of like marketing strategy, especially for social media platforms.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and I think there's a ton of content, or like there's a ton of ideas around that, because like early 2000s, late 90s, there's just a lot of material there to work with in terms of the fashion, the music, slang, all that stuff. So I think it's definitely could be fun.
Yeah, and unlike, you know, earlier generations, like millennials were like the first ones who were doing like the social media. Like we're the originals when it comes to like social media posts and like having an internet presence. It was millennials, and then now Gen Z is kind of like following in millennials' footsteps because there were no like social media posts prior to millennials. There were no like real internet presence prior to millennials. So like I think that's something that's unique and worth like trying to figure out a way to incorporate. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then going back to the questions around core memories, do we want to tap more for parents? Do we want them to tap more into core memories around shoes, around sports, or maybe just kind of like nostalgia more generally?
I think more generally, because though we are starting with the shoe, because we felt like this is a good point for us to start as we try to introduce kids to different sports. Footwear is like one of the more difficult aspects of it when it comes to like hurdles that you have to overcome, because a lot of sports require you to have like sport specific footwear. And if we could do something that is across the board, like something that works across multiple sports and multiple surfaces, then we kind of lower that barrier of entry a little. So I think playing on the experience is better, because then we kind of transcend like footwear. We're talking about something that's much broader. So I think that's probably a better approach than just trying to like pigeonhole a little bit. I get it. We want to emphasize footwear, but we also want to like emphasize an experience, both one that's remembered, like nostalgia, and then an ideal one, because millennials parents are thinking about like the future for their kids. They do remember the good times, but they also want to create like something better as well. So we want to incorporate like a bit of nostalgia, but we also want to show an ideal like future, like something that you're trying to attain, as opposed to like something that was in the past and like was all right, was good. You had a great time, but you want it to be better for your the generations to come, for the kids.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I agree with you that if we focus on just shoes and memories around shoes, things like that, it's too narrow. And we've talked a lot about expansion down the road. and we want to expand to be something that a company that does a lot more than just shoes. And it's really about being active, playing sports, making memories, making friends, leading an active lifestyle, all that kind of stuff. So I think, tapping into memories around any of that stuff, right? Like making, I don't know, scoring your first goal or making the varsity team or the travel team, picking up a new sport and really liking it. Things like that, where I think a lot of people can relate to those things and you still, you feel positive about it. It's something that maybe helped you gain confidence and you still like it just kind of like a snowball effect, right? So you got confidence to then maybe try out for the lead in the play and then you went to school for drama or something and now maybe that's your career or something like that. So I think it's tapping into sports and athletics, exercise as a broader part of people's lives. And hopefully for a lot of these people it's still a big part of who they are. So it feels a bit more, it doesn't feel like a part of them that died like 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah. And kind of like following up or expounding a little bit on one of the points that you mentioned, and maybe tweaking it just a bit. Uh, this thing that I've been hearing is that you get your first win, like when you get that first win in something, like for instance, I was going out to a basketball game for my eldest daughter Andy today, and there was a kid who like made a long shot. There's no like lines in this particular court, so I don't know whether or not it constitutes a 3-point shot, but like it was a long shot. And the parents of both teams kind of go wild because there's not a high expectation here for the kids to be very successful when it comes to shooting the basket. So he starts shooting again. Like he made a couple more shots after that, and like I can tell that he was really kind of getting into it, like really feeling himself at this point. And like during like the halftime, he's shooting on the side, and it just like reminded me of this thing that I heard in terms of like it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if you have like early success in a sport and people start like, praising you and saying like, oh wow, you're really good at that, or that was a really good shot. You want to have that feeling again. Like you want to get that feeling back. And so in order to do it, you're like, wow, I made that shot. Let me get better so that I can make that shot more consistently. Like maybe that's not the exact thing that's going through your mind, but at least you're like feeling like I want to have that feeling again. I like the fact that I made this shot and everybody cheered. And so now the kid who just got introduced to this sport starts taking to the sport, spends the time outside of practice to get better. I'm not saying this is what's going to happen for this young man, but like eventually it could happen for him because I saw like the twinkle in his eye.
He's the next LeBron James.
Yeah, he could be like the next LeBron James because he made a shot in like some kind of like rec league game, and he his parents and all the fans in the stands go crazy for it. Now going back to us, like how are we able to kind of give a wide range of kids that same winning experience? Like how can we create that first win to get people captivated and captured? Because I don't think it's just in sports. I think it happens in a lot of different areas in life. Like if you realize early success and you kind of get credited for it, like people say like, oh, you're really good at like writing stories, or you're really good at like uh playing this particular sport or playing this particular instrument. You kind of like that praise, and you go and you work hard in that particular area. So like how can we like create opportunities to give kids their first win in sports?
I think, I mean, everything you said just resonated a lot with me, and I have some other kind of like thoughts or questions on that. But I think the first thing that comes to my mind is stores, like experiential stores or events, just kind of like fun things, right? So for a lot of people, if you take soccer as an example, it's hard for them to score a goal in a game, especially if you're a defender or if you're not a forward, right? But if you do some kind of, if you have like a dartboard and a kid kicks the ball at a dartboard, a lot of them can maybe get a bullseye. Or if they do tic-tac-toe and they're like kicking in the different spaces, eventually a lot of them are going to get a win. So if you take away some of the pressures and like the really black and white in sports in terms of winning, scoring, assisting, things like that, and get to more of the basics in terms of, okay, kicking the ball properly or throwing the ball properly or making contact with the ball if you're playing baseball, things like that. If we focus on some of the building blocks, I think it'll be a lot easier for kids to get some of those wins earlier on. Because I sometimes I watch for whatever reason, like I'll see kids basketball like games on YouTube Shorts or Instagram Reels or something like that. And then the kids, they never really dribble. They're just kind of like running around with the ball. And then there's always those those guys in the comments like, this is a travel, this is a disgrace, you know, the game is being destroyed, stuff like that. But you know, when you're like 4, you can't really dribble properly. So it's more about, okay, movement, passing, and then the rim is super small or super low. So just seeing the ball go through the hoop. So I think basically, like I said before, making it focusing on the building blocks instead of the final product, then it's going to be a lot easier for kids to feel like they've achieved something and they've gotten their that first win in sports.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. Because I was thinking the same thing in terms of like the experiential stores and being able to like create these first wins or create environments for these first wins to take place in. And I think about like chess.com. And so chess.com had the exact same kind of approach. And so they wanted people to beginners to win early in order for you to like get caught with the get bit by the chess bug and like want to like play chess even more. If you win early, then you know statistics show that you are going to be retained a little bit more when it comes to like signing up for chess.com and like the certain things that they have on there. And so they wanted it to be not a 50-50, so not like playing another beginner. So you'd play like a coach AI and you could like play against them and win. But they also knew that there's like it doesn't have the same type of reinforcement as like playing an actual person and beating them. So there's got to be like some kind of give and take on that. And I think about like that in our experiential stores. Like we want to like focus on like the fundamentals and like winning in those like building block stages, kind of how you mentioned. But at the same time, we want it to feel real. Not that it's not real, but it's got to have like that. It's got to feel like the situation has to be sincere. It can't be like fabricating a win for them. But I think like if we can create an environment, when I say create an environment for wins, is create a chance for them, a higher chance, a higher probability of success early on. So yeah, no, I like that a lot. I mean, I was thinking the same thing in terms of like incorporating it, so having a much more controlled setting and like being able to create these environments for wins and that being a way to like encourage kids down a particular path. So like I think that's a good way of like looking at it. Where were some of the other things? I know you mentioned, you had like a couple of other questions that came out of that. Where were some of the other ones?
Now, can you just jog my memory on what exactly you were touching on? Because it just like left my brain completely.
No, so I was going through like that whole story that kind of happened earlier today with the kid going out and like making
Yeah.
a long shot, and then the parents, and not only the parents, but the actual fans in the stands were, the other parents, kids from other parents of other kids, were like cheering him on and like applauding him, and then he
Yeah,
came in.
yeah, yeah.
I think he was also like at halftime. You see him like now like shooting the basket a little bit more. Um, and and then also talking about just like a chance to kind of like play on that experience to be able to like allow many more than just that one individual to like feel that same way,
Yep,
and like
yep.
able to do that, like how can we be able to create those wins? And
Yeah.
then you're
So the first thing that came to mind was it was just a comment. So I think it's also if people tell you you're good at something, you're going to believe you're good at it, and then you're going to put in more effort, right? So you're talking about the guy practicing shots at halftime or after the game or whatever.
Mhm.
So people who do that, they're going to become better because if you practice something more, you're going to get better. So it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
Then I think also if you start thinking, okay, with sports, you know, I can pick up these new sports, I can be good at them. like I could do hard things. I think that also translates to other areas of life as well. So I think that's just a good mindset to have in general. And then one of the things I wanted to ask you was, have you ever, when you were a kid, did you ever have a moment like that where maybe like both sides were cheering for you and then you're like, man, I really am good at this sport, or this is a really good experience, things like that?
Absolutely. I mean, it probably first happened in football, like just playing flag football and just being able to make a catch. Like, this is like early on, so the bar's again pretty low. But being able to make these catches and people say, like, oh wow, you've got great hands, like you've got a natural talent for this. And so like, I mean, I went down that path because of that early praise and that feeling of like going out. There's other probably reasons that like help reinforce the idea of going down and playing football for a while, but that was definitely some of it. Like being able to experience that early success, making like I just still remember, like I remember the jerseys, I remember everything. I remember like, we're as a flag football team, we're green shirts and like out there on the YMCA fields and making this like, making these catches and getting like that type of like praise. And then like, wow, this is like, I must be good at this. Like I must actually be good at it. And like you continue to practice it. And like people ask you like, oh, what's your favorite sport? And then like all of a sudden you're starting to say football all the time because, and then in order to like justify continuing to say that, you put in a lot of time and effort, and it gets more fun the better you get at it. And so yeah, I think it definitely happened to me, and that was just like one example. I'm sure it happened in a few other sports too, but it's vividly in my mind from that like early experience playing flag football, making these catches, parents and kids being able to like, great game, great play, that was an awesome catch, and like hearing that just like feeds into that whole mindset of, oh, this is my sport, this is what I'm good at. I've got like I'm really talented at catching the ball. And so yeah, that's my experience. That's my nostalgia moment.
So for me, I was thinking, because I think about this experience every now and then, but so basketball was never really my sport. I was decent at it, but I was a lot better at soccer and hockey. And I remember, so my dad was my coach a lot of times in basketball, and we would shoot around at the gym, kind of like get warmed up before the game. And I would always, I mean, I grew up before three-pointers in basketball were really a thing. So back then it was still like, that's a bad shot. And my dad is like very much a conservative kind of like basketball mind. So towards the end of our warm-ups, I would always start shooting threes. And this was when I was maybe like 8 or 9. So I was still pretty weak and I could barely even like my form would be bad. And he'd always say, like, why are you shooting those? You're never going to shoot those in the game. And I remember this one game I shot, because I never really shot much. I was more of a passer. I remember like shot 3 out of 3 on three-pointers kind of like in the first few quarters. And I was like, man, like I've never really made that many threes in a game. And then at the very end, I hit a buzzer beater. And I don't think the game was even close. I think we were winning by a decent amount at that point in time. But I remember like both sides like came off the bench and like, congratulated me and stuff like that. And I remember thinking like, man, that was such a good game. But now I look back at it and I'm like, 4 of 4 from three for 12 points, that's nothing. But still it was a good memory. And I felt like, man, I can actually shoot three-pointers. And that was the first time where I felt like I'd actually done it successfully in a game. So it was pretty fun.
No, yeah, I I think back and having similar experiences. That's really cool. Definitely understand the whole like our basketball coaches were pretty conservative minded when they came to like our strategy, and so they were always like pass it into the bigs. It was an inside out kind of
Exactly.
strategy.
Exactly. Exactly.
The old
Exactly.
school approach works really well when you have 7 footers, but like we were height challenged on that team. I think I
Yeah.
was like playing center, and or at least I was playing the four or something like that. So cool. I think we touched on one of your questions in terms of like what's your first positive sports memory, but is there another positive sports
I
memory?
think in general for me, I really enjoyed a lot of the tournaments that I went to because it's just like hanging out with friends, playing sports all day, and then for me, it was always fun to just be in a hotel, like going to the pool, playing Xbox and a room with one of my friends, things like that. So those are some of my best memories that are sports related, but not exactly on the field.
Yeah. No, I think some of my early like memories, the ones that I kind of like look back onto even now is just like early like junior high and high school, uh just playing football, basketball, even track, just remembering out there. Like it's different feelings in like each sport. That's another like distinct thing.
Yeah.
Football, it felt a lot less like, you know, individualistic. Like it was definitely like a team type of environment. You wearing a helmet, you're not really like, I don't know, it was a lot less about you and more about like the effort of the entire team. Where, juxtapose that with like track, where there was like a different pressure. I remember having like the craziest butterflies before a track meet because it was like all on you. And then
Me
there's
too.
all like when that gun went off, it was the first, I don't know, second or two of like out of body type of experience. I don't even know how to explain it, but it was like I can't, it's like I'm actually here and doing this. Like, wow, this is crazy. Like, and then boom, it like all comes back in, like back to like tunnel vision. But yeah, there's a definitely a different feeling with each and every single one of these sports. And I thought that was like super unique and super like there were some great takeaways, from each sport. So that's another reason why I kind of like want my daughters to play different sports because there are different like feelings. I mean, I don't even know how to really explain it, but it's a different situation in a different environment. And you can miss out on that if you kind of get pigeonholed down one particular sport or you don't get a chance to play in another sport. Like it's totally different. Even soccer, like it was a different like feeling, a different experience in the different arenas that I was in. And I think that's something that's unique about like sports in general, but something that I definitely want to make sure that I pass along and give as many kids an opportunity as possible to have these experiences.
Yeah. There's definitely different, I agree with that. There's different kind of feelings before different sporting events and during. And then also I think it's kind of humbling when, for me at least, I was like, okay, certain sports I'm good at and I know that. And then other sports I'm like, dude, I'm terrible at this sport. Like this is gonna be a long day, or like I don't want to let my teammates down, things like that. Versus other sports, it's like, my teammates are relying on me to deliver. So I think that's humbling, and it's also good to just be in different situations where you're not always going to be the best, and then other situations where you are the best. So I think that's also something that I took away from sports.
For sure, for sure. I guess we can getting back to spring and like our conversation with her. I thought I wanted to know like how did she get the rights
I
to a
didn't
lot
understand that either. Yeah.
and it was almost as if it was like uh a situation where she won like squatters rights or she was able to get it through what's the I should know this as an
Like
attorney.
adverse possession kind of.
I couldn't think of it. Yeah, through like some kind of like adverse possession. Like they didn't like use it for a certain amount of time and she was able to come in and like use it. I thought that was like a very interesting way in which you're able to get the rights to some of these older like characters. I thought she went out and like paid for the rights to them. It makes me wonder how you can kind of like be able to protect them if you don't really have ownership over it, unless it's like she can provide ownership through use. Um, More of an observation than anything. I don't know if there's like a question that comes out of that or a way in which we can relate it to like what we're trying to do at Worldie. I just thought it was a very interesting way and a way I didn't know about like being able to do in order to like have the rights to some older, cartoons or just characters in general.
Yeah, I don't understand it. I remember asking a question about, I think, can't remember exactly the question, but I was asking thinking that she was licensing
Hmm.
the rights, but she essentially said that she has no relationship, right, with Disney or whoever created the franchises. So I don't know exactly how she does it, but it does seem like it's something where they kind of abandon the rights to it, so anyone can just come behind them and, I guess, commercialize the franchise now. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's the way I felt in which she explained it. Like I thought that's what she was saying. And so I mean, I'm not obviously versed on like how to be able to do that, but I was like not thinking that's the way in which she like set it up. Kind of like unique, very cool kind of way of going in and just like taking ownership of something that's kind of been abandoned.
Yeah. And another thing, Spring is really big on community. So we've talked a little bit already about building community, but once we do build it, and we already have a little bit of a community based on LinkedIn, kind of like law school, business school, and then just people in our personal lives. But how do we thank and give back to them without, giving them money or huge discounts, things that might be not exactly beneficial to the company?
I mean, I think one of the ways in which you can kind of give back to your community is through involvement and engagement. I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot of like, it doesn't take a lot of monetary like, movement. All you have to really kind of do is expend the time and energy to let people know what's going on and staying engaged, keeping them informed, allowing them insight maybe before the public at large kind of knows about it. Kind of insight as to like what you're doing and allowing it to be like a two-way street. So like allowing them to communicate back some of their thoughts, their like feedback or whatnot, and showing that you're listening by utilizing some of their like some of their suggestions or whatever, like being able to like act upon their feedback. So I think those are some ways in which it doesn't cost a whole lot to reward people in a sense for being a part of the community. And what ways were you thinking about in terms of like being able to kind of do this similar thing?
No, I think everything you said is right. I think also just making sure that they feel like they're being listened to, right? So we talked before about a lot of unsolicited feedback, but
Mhm.
these are people that we're actually asking for feedback from. So, if we send out a survey and say like, hey, can you guys help us out and fill out the survey, making sure that we follow up with the people who do fill it out and say, hey, thanks for doing that, or things like that. Just making sure that if we're going out asking people for input and for help, making sure that we let them know that that's actually informing the things that we're doing, even if we don't necessarily do what they suggested. We received it, we considered it, we thought about it. It helped us, but it's not necessarily the direction that we went in or down. Then I think that's good, because I see a lot of people, this is specifically on LinkedIn, but I'm sure it happens other places too, where someone is either asking for ideas or advice on something. And sometimes I've commented on some of those posts, and then you never hear from the person again, right? So they just kind of like make an announcement, they get a bunch of input, and then you never see them again. So I think that is something that I've never really wanted to do, where you just gather a bunch of input and don't thank the people, or even kind of like do something as simple as just liking their comment or whatever. So I think it's things like that as well. Even if it's time consuming, taking the time to thank someone who took the time to help you out.
Yeah, no, I've definitely noticed that about, just your social media presence, that it's been consistent, like very regular on regular intervals. And you've definitely done a lot in terms of being able to interact with the people who've engaged or given advice or whatever it might be, and letting them know, acknowledging that. I think that's big. And I think a lot of that kind of gets missed. And that's why some people have not been as successful with their like social media campaigns, because not that this is what's going to make you successful, but it's definitely one of the things that will keep you from being successful if you're not consistent, if you're not acknowledging, if you don't engage.
Yeah, I think so too. And then similar kind of question, or at least somewhat related, Spring posts a lot on a lot of different social media platforms. So I think I've seen her post as much as like 6 times a day on LinkedIn. Do you think we're being maybe too conservative and maybe like not wanting to put ourselves out there? Because it seems like Spring is very comfortable putting herself out there. Do you think there's any instances in which we've maybe not put ourselves out there enough, or where we should be maybe pushing ourselves to put ourselves out there more?
No, I definitely like admire like Spring's ability to like constantly like post and like constantly engage. She's definitely going out and making sure that she's a presence. And I've sat like I can't speak for you. Like I know I sat on the sideline for quite some time, using a litany of excuses as to why I haven't, posted or engaged or whatever. But I think like having that type of mentality where I'm going to go out and put myself out there, I'm going to see what works and what doesn't work. So I'm going to constantly like post in different ways, post in different formats. I think that's something that I can kind of take away from what Spring is doing. She's definitely like, all right, this is I'm unbarred. I'm just going to go out there and try these things out and let people know and engage and be a presence. And that's something that I feel like I personally can do more of. And that's really like how you figure out what resonates. Because if you don't try these different things, if you don't put yourself out there, if you don't try different formats for your content, then you're not going to figure out like what worked or what didn't work. And you're not going to be like able to, the chances of you being successful in terms of like a social media standpoint are going to be a much lower. So yeah, I feel like there's more that we can do. Yes, because there's more that I can do. Um,
Yeah,
I don't know.
maybe one of the ways that we can, because I've tried to get a little bit better about this in terms of like if I meet someone who's a parent, asking them questions, not, selling our product to them or anything, but like, what kind of shoes do you buy for your kid? Are you satisfied with the brand? How much do you spend usually? Things like that. I think maybe stuff in person, I could maybe push myself a little bit more to ask more questions, gather more information. And I mean, on social media, I think I've done it enough where I have a decent understanding of what's going to perform well versus what's not. So naturally, I'm not going to want to post something that I feel like is not going to get any engagement. So maybe that's also something where it's like, if it's something that I think is good for us to get out there, then just post it, even if it's not going to get a ton of likes. I think that's also something that maybe I need to think a little bit more about. But at the same time, it's like if you get a lot of likes on your post, then it maybe makes you look a little bit more credible versus if all your posts have like no engagement. So I think it's definitely a balance. But I think for me, like in-person stuff, maybe I could get a bit better at it.
Yeah, and I mean, it could be a point where like doing some of the in-person stuff is something that I end up having to like lean into a bit more, especially since, taking having to take jobs and we're taking jobs and now we're not just speaking on behalf of ourselves or worldie. We also by default are speaking on behalf of the organization that we're affiliated with, that we took our job with. And so it becomes a bit more difficult to like navigate that, because now you have to worry about like not stepping on toes from like a corporate standpoint and not only just like what you're doing from a venture or a personal standpoint. So um, easier to possibly do in person than it is like online because you're able to provide a bit more context, and personalize that context a bit more because you're going to be talking in theory, I guess, to the individual in which you in whom you're communicating with. So like, yeah, there's a bunch of dynamics at play there, but still with the mindset, there's more that I can be doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Does Cooley have, can you speak on Cooley's clients or is that confidential?
Can I speak on their clients?
Like, can you say, like, I was going to ask, do they have any footwear clients where there's a potential conflict or no?
So we get like what they call like a business intake, which like shows who's our clients and potential conflicts. And so that gets sent out every weekday morning. And then there's also a conflicts check that you go through and you kind of like announce, does Cooley have footwear clients? Yes, they do. Does that present a conflict? not necessarily. It depends on if you're related to that matter. Are you, are you an attorney on that matter? Um, do you have any knowledge on that matter? Whatever it might be, like just because they have a footwear client doesn't mean there's a conflict right away. There's a
Yeah,
potential, but it doesn't mean like that conflict
yeah,
exists.
yeah. But I was just asking because, like, if you go on social media and you start trashing a bunch of footwear companies, then if one of those is a client of Cooley, then that could be a bad look, right?
Most definitely. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I already like that's not really how I would post anyway.
Yeah, yeah,
Crashing a certain brand or even talking and putting a certain brand in a negative light. Um, if I were to like put a brand in a negative light, it wouldn't be like necessarily the intent of the post. It would be from like a factual standpoint, like, okay, these are the facts. And if the facts paint you into like a negative
yeah.
light, that's on the facts. It's not on, me. I'm not presenting it in such a way in which like it should be negative for you or like I'm intending it to be negative for you. It's just that's how it was.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's a similar situation for me. There's potential conflicts, but like I don't think I'll be able to work on any kind of case where there's a conflict because I'm not going to give this business up, right? So I'll just say like, hey, put me on a different case and don't talk to me about any of the particulars because I don't want to get sued down the road. So just don't bring up anything that is even potentially confidential around me.
yeah. So I had to disclose that I was a co-founder of worldie in the conflicts check at the very beginning. Um, so yeah, it definitely makes things and so far nothing has come up. Obviously very early on into my time at Cooley. But like if it were, yeah, it would be a similar situation where I would have to like recuse myself.
Yeah.
Like not a judge or justice, but like in a sense, I would remove myself from that.
Yeah. Yeah. This is kind of random. This is not something related to the spring conversation, but I saw this post today from this guy. He makes a filtering shower head. So you put it on the shower and it filters your shower water.
Okay.
And they basically have this offer where if a customer of any shower head, if they're unsatisfied with their current shower head, if they spent more than $120 on it, and if they have a receipt, they can send it to this guy and his company, and then that company will give them a free version of their product instead. So I thought that was kind of an interesting customer acquisition strategy because they're kind of like a subscription, right? So like with a water filter with drinking water, you replace those every few months. So it's the same kind of thing with the shower head where if you get that customer, then their lifetime value is going to be pretty high if they keep buying the product because they're spending, I don't know, like $100 every 3 months or whatever it is. So maybe it makes more sense for a business model like that. But I thought that was just kind of an interesting thought because you're focusing on people who already are interested in filtered shower heads, which is probably like a pretty niche product, right? So you're already getting people who are interested in that stuff. You're getting people who are not satisfied with their current product, and then basically introducing them to a new brand. So I think it's pretty smart. I don't know if it's applicable at all to us, but I wanted to share it just because I thought it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I actually think it is applicable to us. And we might not be able to do it to that scale, but we can definitely like set up some type of like smaller version of that. And what I was thinking of is kind of like doing like the first 500. If for 500 like parents, so this would be 500 pairs of shoes. If you are not satisfied with your kids like current like sports footwear, the footwear that you're using for your kids are using for their sports right now, if you're not satisfied with it for whatever reason, like durability, there's holes in it or whatever, or fit, it doesn't fit right, or performance, like they're constantly like sliding on grass or whatever it might be, then send that product to us and we will send you a free version of our product. And doing that like for the first I said 500, maybe it's 100, maybe it's, some kind of set number, as opposed to like his was like, from what I gather, was more open-ended. Like anyone who paid over 120, like they can continue to, anyone's able to do that. Ours would kind of be like capped. That way we can get parents who are already putting their kids into sports and who already have that same mindset of like getting their kids engaged, and they're doing that. And now we're giving them the product to utilize in that particular setting. And perhaps we can kind of like not require it, but go back and get feedback from them, and like, I'll, interact with them or engage with them a bit more. And even though we're giving away the product for free, we're still getting something out of it. We're getting, one, our footwear out there on the feet of, different kids. And then we're also creating an avenue to get feedback. Because we gave it away, I think parents would be much more inclined to give, their feedback when asked, as opposed to like, I don't know, I'm not sure if that's the case, but like I feel
I would
like
think
they,
so too, yeah. And I think you could also do it like, okay, when we first start out, we're gonna have a lot fewer shoes to kind of like give away. But when we're maybe like a year or two into the journey, you could almost do something where it's like every month we're going to give away 50 pairs of shoes to a parent who is unsatisfied with their kid's shoes. So like, I don't know, send us the shoes that your kid is currently wearing, maybe like a picture of where they're wearing out or a description of why they're bad or whatever, and then we'll enter you into a raffle, and 50 lucky parents will get um, a free pair of shoes, something like that.
yeah, something along those lines. It definitely makes more sense to do it later on after a few iterations, because you want to be confident that your the quality, the durability, the performance standards all meet the
Yeah.
standards that you have for it. That therefore you're not swapping out crap for crap.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, it's something that I was thinking about making a LinkedIn post on this, but I'm still thinking through kind of how I think about this. But I used to think in the past as like, you should never give away free products because you're just basically burning cash. But now I've realized, giving away free products strategically, it's actually pretty important. And it can actually reduce the customer acquisition costs just because you have brand evangelists, there's word of mouth, all that kind of stuff. Um, so I think there's a lot of different ways that you can justify giving out products for free. And you could even justify giving out our entire, at first MOQ out for free. It would be a huge financial burden for us to take on, but you could at least in theory justify it. So I'm trying to like just in my mind figure out, how should we think about, at what point does it become no longer beneficial to keep giving out free products, right? Because there's benefits to giving out free products. So at what point is that, where's that inflection point where now you're giving out free product and you're just losing money on a unit basis versus incrementally gaining revenue or whatever it is?
I think you can always have that. This is just my mindset. Always have that incorporated in your model. You just have to be strategic about how you incorporate giving out free product. Initially, it can be lowering customer acquisition costs. And then maybe it's decreasing the churn rate. And then maybe it's just a part of like how you want to set yourself up from a values kind of perspective. Like, we're a company that every, kind of like the sock company that gives away a pair of socks, with how, with every 10 pair of socks that are purchased, one pair gets sent out or given away. And so we can kind of have like the same kind of setup to where like, it's pretty altruistic. Like you buy like every 50 shoes, since a portion of the proceeds go to like purchasing shoes for, underprivileged kids, we give away a certain amount of shoes per year, and that's going to be throughout the life of Worldly. Like, it's always going to be a part of it. So like, I think there are different ways in which you can strategically incorporate giving product away, and you're not necessarily giving it away without receiving benefit, because one, it can lower customer acquisition costs. and then maybe later on in the life it can decrease the churn rate, and then maybe later on it kind of like reinforces your image or reinforces the values that you really wanted to portray as a company.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I don't know. Any other questions coming out of that conversation with Spring?
I don't think so. I think that's it.
Yeah, always interesting interacting with her. I thought it was good. Um, it's always kind of funny, like just hearing, kind of hearing her stories and hearing her anecdotes and hearing like her perspective on things. So I thought it was a good convo.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting to hear a lot of her thoughts on childhood memories and how you tap into those, because that's something that is also, that idea of nostalgia, positive memories, all that kind of stuff is important to what we're doing as well. And she's the first person we've talked to who's kind of had that perspective. So I think it was definitely a good conversation.
Yeah, I agree 100.